Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome James Reeves to this special bonus episode celebrating the 20th anniversary of Jeepers Creepers. How are we doing, James?
We're doing great.
You were telling me that you saw this in a theater, Jeepers Creepers, is that right?
I did not. It came out when I was 11, so I had to actually sneak and see it when it came on video.
So, well, I mean, I was seeing horror films in the theater at age 11, but like it might have been hard at that age for you to sneak into a theater or try to like get a copy from the video store and bring it home and watch it.
We had our ways, yeah.
You had your ways. Were you interested in horror films at a very young age? Like when did that come to?
Yeah,
When did that begin?
Ever since I was little. I used to have to sneak and watch horror films. My cousin babysat me a lot, and she introduced me to horror films sort of unconsciously, because she was watching Nightmare on Elm Street, and then she was watching Child's Play. Of course, I was terrified at 3 or 4, but then I was like, I'm really intrigued by this. And I've always been obsessed with the paranormal, the occult, and everything of that nature. And I was raised quite conservatively, so I had to sneak and watch these things. And when I got older, my parents were basically like, I guess this is not a phase. This is something that he's into. And I try to look at everything from an entertainment sort of standpoint, but also I think horror films are quite therapeutic, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. I don't understand that idea, especially when you're younger, like, oh, don't let the kids watch the scary movies. I think scary movies are really important for younger people. Like it's able to kind of exercise your fears in a way that's
No
safe.
pun intended.
Exactly.
But even as a kid, though, in the 90s, we had a paranormal themed shows. We had Goosebumps. We had Are You Afraid of the Dark? We had Eerie, Indiana, and then Disney had So Weird, which was too good for Disney. It was a show about.
I don't know. Too Weird. What was that about?
So Weird was about a girl who lived on a tour bus with her mom. And she was really into the cult and paranormal, and she saw things, and come to find out it was because her dad was really interested in the occult, and he was pulled out of his body by demons. And it's on Disney Plus now, and rewatch it, and you're like, this is so progressive, and so it was too good for Disney, to be honest. Disney didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. So like when you were in the 90s, were you seeing any of these kind of big horror films like Scream, like I Know What You Did Last Summer? Like that first stage of that new renaissance? Did you see some of those early on?
I was a bit young when those came out, but I saw them on cable.
Okay.
When they finally went to cable, because things went to cable pretty quickly back in the 90s.
True.
So I saw them, on FX or, Cinemax or Showtime or HBO. So I was able to catch them after they're out of theaters. And then once I got to like 13 or 14, I started to go into the movie theaters with my friends to see horror films. So.
Well, do you remember the first horror film you saw in a theater?
The first horror film I saw in theaters was the remake of The Hills Have Eyes.
Oh, okay. From 2006. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good remake.
It was hilarious because I saw it with my friend. It was her sweet 16th birthday party. And they were all girls. I was the only guy that went. And they all ran out of the theater. And I was the only one that stood. They ran out of the movie theater, literally physically ran out of the movie theater.
They didn't just leave the theater. They ran out?
Yeah. I stayed. I'm like, what is y'all's problem?
It was too scary for them?
Too gruesome, too gory.
Too gruesome? Yeah.
And then my brother,
Yeah, when you were like in your 20s, right? So, or even in your teens, that was kind of the stage of horror where we got a lot of remakes and we got a lot of that that torture porn, like bloody, gory, just buckets of blood on the screen. So that was not my favorite era of like 7 to 8 years where it's like, all right, can we go back to that classic kind of spooky storytelling?
No, really, yeah.
Which we've had more so the last 10 years.
Oh yeah, because I was like 14. I'm not quite sure what year it came out. When I was 14, Saw was a big thing, and I went to the movie theater and saw it with my friends, and I'm like, I'm not impressed because it was just basically there to shock people and to gross them out. And I didn't think it had any sort of literary merit or literary worth to it because it was just, like you said, gore porn.
Yeah, some of them are okay. Like the original Saw has like a mystery to it that I like and a really cool
Yeah.
twist ending. But once you get into a lot of the sequels of that stuff, it's just like they're just trying to shock you, and that's not interesting to
Yeah.
me. And there's no rewatchability factor with a lot of those movies, unlike
Yeah.
horror films of the 70s and 80s and stuff you can just watch over and over, and they're always fun.
Yeah,
Not
I agree.
grossing you out. So, what are your like 3 to 5 favorite horror films? If you had to pick like your 5 horror movies to take with you to a desert island, like, what are the ones you
For
love the
sure.
most? Or what? Or space?
Yeah. I always use that as an example, space.
Okay.
Because I would love isolation because I'm an extroverted introvert, so I'd actually love to be by myself in space.
Okay.
Uh,
By yourself in space.
yes. The first one's The Exorcist because I actually have an Exorcist shirt on right now.
Yeah. So those of you who are only listening to this, James is wearing an Exorcist T-shirt. That's very cool. I want that. I have a Psycho shirt that's very similar.
Oh, really?
It's black with just the white letters for Psycho.
I love The Exorcist. I think it's no other film afterwards has been matched in terms of originality, but also the message. Yes, it's it has some gore and it has some shock factor, but if you actually dissect The Exorcist, it has a really good message. And I was telling you before, when I was in grad school, I wrote a paper on looking at Exorcist through the lens of feminist theory, and it's quite progressive in that Reagan, yes, is possessed by this very demonic male spirit, but she survives it, and her mother survives it, and it's all the men in the film that have to die and get possessed in the end.
Yeah.
So I love The Exorcist, and I really love its impact on not only horror, the genre of horror, but also its impact on entertainment. And because when it first came out, it shocked people. People had never seen anything like that on screen. People passed out.
Yeah, speaking of running out of the theater, people were like vomiting in the aisles, passing out. Like they would have to get medical attention. You know what day that came out, that movie?
I don't. It was a Christmas Day.
It was December 26th, 1973. So they let you have your Christmas holiday and then unleash that movie into the world. It was like a huge hit. I mean, that was a huge blockbuster hit for the horror genre, unlike anything we'd seen for years, right? So that was cool.
Right. And I love Return of the Living Dead because of how campy it is, and intentionally campy. I mean, it's scary and it's based on Night of the Living Dead, etc. Yeah. But it's intentionally campy, and I like it. I like a horror film that doesn't take itself too seriously, because sometimes if they take themselves too seriously, it's stupid.
I agree, but sometimes when they try to mix comedy with horror, it doesn't always work. It's kind of a dance that not every filmmaker is able to do really well. But when it's done great, like it is in Return of the Living Dead, I love that. The first one is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. The second, third one are horrible. I love Puppet Master. That's one of the movies that I rented.
I have never seen any of the Puppet Master movies. It's like on my list. It's one of those that I've been meaning to see. What's so good about Puppet Master?
It was don't watch any of them after the first one. But
okay, don't watch the other 7 or whatever how many there are.
No, there's like 15 or 16.
15 or 16? Seriously? Come on. Why?
Yeah. But the thing about Puppet Master, it was released straight to video. And so Full Moon Features that still makes B horror films, they released it straight to video. So it didn't go to movie theaters. I think it maybe some couple screens, but it went straight to video. And I rented it at Blockbuster when it first came out. And I would go to my grandparents' house, and my grandmother really didn't care what I rented. And so that's when I started renting like Puppet Master.
That's where you rent the horror films?
Yes, Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, good one.
So Puppet Master is campy, and it's debatable if it was supposed to be campy, but I love it because, the puppets aren't necessarily bad, and they're not necessarily good. They're sort of neutral, and if you see in the beginning of the film, they're basically controlled by whatever essence controls them. So if they have a good puppet master, they behave well. But if they have someone controlling them that may not have the best intentions, they sort of take on the energy and the personality of whoever's controlling them. So puppet masters, so whoever their puppet master is. And I love Hellraiser. I think Hellraiser is really, really beautiful.
Yes, Clive Barker.
Yes,
fantastic
I think it's
director.
really beautiful. And if you get into why he did Hellraiser and what it's based on, and his experiences, in London, and his experiences in sort of seedy bars and sort of seedy professions, and he based it on basically humans' fear of pleasure, also humans' fear of fear. So I love Hellraiser, and I love Sleepaway Camp.
Sleepaway Camp. Yes, that title has not come up on the podcast yet. That's a good one.
I like Angela in the second and the third because she's grown now. She just really doesn't care. She'll just kill people if they talk too much, if they don't have manners, if they cuss too much. She kills them, and I love that. And there are I love Nightmare on Elm Street. Although when it's starting to get into like the Dream Child, it started to get
parts 5 and 6. I'm not a big fan of. I really do enjoy parts 1 through 4. And we just recorded an episode recently. I said probably my favorite horror sequel is New Nightmare of all time. I love that movie. And some people don't, and that's okay if you don't. I just love the meta aspect of that. Like, what happens if we actually examine the figures who made the original movie and how the ending of the franchise is affecting them in real life? It's just like a cool idea that's never really been done before.
Yeah, it was interesting.
It was interesting.
And the second one is all right. I like the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I get the second one's worth, and I get why the second one has such a big following because of all the gay subtext.
Yeah.
And then, so I really like 80s horror films. I really like 70s horror films, The Shining. And I'm pressed to find good horror films. And I know that makes me sort of an outsider of people who like horror, but I feel like now with horror, there's this huge shock factor. Either they're trying to shock you or they're trying to lure you in with the false pretext of based on a true story.
Oh,
and
right.
I know the haunting movies are really big and the movies that involve the Warrens, but
The Conjuring.
If you actually do
not your favorite.
If you actually do research on the Warrens, like everything's been debunked and they actually had no evidence whatsoever. And, their kids even admitted that some of it was just old people's fantasies. So, I mean, I don't know.
If you put on The Conjuring and you're like, oh, this is based on a true story, and then you watch the movie and then you tell your friends and oh, that really happened. Everything in that movie. Like, no, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, maybe like what, 5%? Maybe 1%. Like 1%. Less than 1%.
If that. Yeah. And then my two favorite new horror films are Hereditary and The Witch, because I think they're extremely original, but they also are extremely psychological because they both deal with people's mental breakdown. In Hereditary, it's about the loss of a child. And The Witch is about, isolation and suppression. Those children in The Witch have to be suppressed. They have to suppress their personalities, their individuality, their sensuality. And it drives people crazy. And I think the smart thing about Hereditary and The Witch is if you really don't know what things are happening until you get to the end, you're like, is this really happening? Or are we just seeing a really sad mental decline of these characters?
Yeah, Hereditary is probably my favorite horror movie of the last 10 years. That was like, I remember like 15, 20 minutes in, I'm like, okay, this is going to be something special. Like, this is really good. And Toni Collette, man, she's just firing on all cylinders in that movie. Like, she is... That to me is the best performance of an actor of the last 10 years or more in film that did not get an Oscar nomination. I'm like, how does this not get an Oscar nomination? She's insanely good in that. So yeah, those are all really great titles. Do you like Halloween, the original Halloween from 78?
I do. Okay. I do like Halloween. And
that's my favorite horror film.
I do like Friday the 13th. But I feel like it's sort of become a victim of endless reboots.
Too many reboots. It is tough, right? Especially with the new ones with Jamie Lee Curtis back. It's like, it's hard to really distance yourself from all of these versions, and you could like just watch the first one. It's just, it always is there. you can just forget this other stuff, right?
I like supernatural horror.
Okay.
Because I feel like with slasher films, even though Sleepaway Camp's a slasher film, I mean, it's hilarious. But I like supernatural horror films because if it's, say, Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, they can still, even though, they could be shot a million times and not die, there's still a possibility they're going to be brought to justice for whatever they do. But with supernatural horror films, it's something that is outside the realm of human experience. So how can you um, chase after or punish something that's not of this world? And I like,
Okay.
and I guess sort of not to get too in depth into my childhood, but I grew up in haunted houses my entire life, believe it or
Okay.
not.
You were gonna
So
not talk about this?
I, I am desensitized to horror films, and I can't get scared of horror films because I'm like, I like being
Because
scared.
you've seen ghosts in real life.
Not seen, but heard and experienced.
You've heard
But
ghosts. You've heard voices.
oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I don't really talk about it much because people look at me like I'm crazy, and I like to use the analytical side of my brain. But sometimes, you have to sit back and you have to look, and you're like, this is the making a great horror film. And then you try to connect the dots with everything, and you try to, I guess you go through the 5 stages of grief, denial, and then finally acceptance. And then you're like, yeah, this really happened. And then it wasn't, just one particular situation. It was, I guess you could say, I honestly say probably 3 up until 17.
Okay.
Because yeah. And
Just everywhere you would move to was haunted.
yes.
So maybe it's like Insidious, like the spirit was following you.
The family, yeah. I don't know. It was really weird. I don't know if this is relevant to what we're talking about.
But the space you're in now is not haunted. There won't be a ghost
No,
like
the
that
space
shows up
was
behind
not.
you on Zoom.
They don't bother me. I'm like, hey, what's up? But yeah, I think it wasn't that so much that the houses were haunted. I think it was more the aspect of, I don't know, my dad's family was haunted, if that makes sense. Because all
Oh,
of my
okay.
dad's family, my dad is a 10 of 10 kids, and all of them have experience with that. And
Oh, interesting.
so I'm in my earliest memory. uh, my mom said that I was in my room talking to someone, and she didn't know. She thought I had imaginary friends. And when she asked who I was talking to, I told her a name of a man, and it just so happened that that man had died. And she was actually on the phone with her friend, and that's how she got the news that that man had died.
Oh, weird.
And then my dad, yeah, flash forward to when my parents decided to build a house near a location where there are Native American burial grounds and
Okay.
Native American, it's even called Indian Springs. And we
Mm-hmm.
used to hear and see things. And then I finally said, one day it got to be where it was too much. And so I went outside. I remember I said, listen, we're sorry. We didn't mean to build a house here. We're good, blah, blah, blah. And then it went away. And then I moved out of that house, but my niece lives in that house now, and she's like, "Oh, they're
Oh.
back, like poltergeist."
Oh, they're still there. Okay. So you can go,
Yes.
you can still go and visit.
Oh, I don't go visit anymore.
You don't go not sleeping in that house, huh?
No.
No. Well, that's
No,
very
I'm not.
interesting. So age 11, you're age 11, Jeepers Creepers comes out. Like, when did you
Yeah.
first hear about the movie? Like, where did you discover it was a thing?
The lunchroom table at school, everybody was talking about it, and
Yeah. It
they were
opened at the
describing.
very end of August of 01. So were you, maybe you had just started the new school year? Like, were
Right,
they all talking about it? Yeah.
they were all talking about it and describing the film to me. I was like, I've got to see this film.
I've got to see it.
And then, like I said, things went to cable pretty shortly after they came out back in the day. Um, and I didn't see
It
it.
wasn't available by Halloween, was it? That would have been too fast.
So it might
No.
have been when I was 12 or 13 I first saw it.
Oh, you didn't see it till later. Okay.
Right, it had been 12. I think I saw it finally at 12, and I was like, okay, I get why they liked it so much, but I saw its merit. I didn't find it scary, but I found it really original.
Yeah, yeah, this is not a horror film I like that's necessarily really scary. I do think some of the opening stuff is pretty scary. But
Yeah,
after he goes down the chute,
right.
everything else is more kind of like stylized and cool. You're not really scared that much because, as we'll talk about, they do show a lot of the creeper very early on. This is not a movie
Yeah,
where we keep the creature, the villain, behind the scenes very much. Like, we're showing this guy.
yeah.
So the first time you saw it, what did you think of it? And has that opinion changed at all to now, watching it recently?
Um, when I first saw it, of course, at 12 years old, I was still like, I thought I was doing something forbidden to watch something,
Mm-hmm.
a horror film. And so I had that expectation of I was going to be scared, but I was more intrigued by sort of the stylistic choices. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I remember even at that age wondering, is this intentionally bad? Or is it not intentionally bad? I mean, that's still a debate if Jeepers Creepers is trying to follow the mode of those really bad made-for-video horror films, those B movies, or if it's taking itself too seriously. And
Oh, interesting.
that it wasn't scary,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember thinking at that age if it was intentionally campy and bad, or it was unintentionally. I was a cynic since I was,
Oh,
11.
I've never thought of it that way. I've always looked at the film as Victor Salvage, like trying to create a really original, scary, fun horror movie. I've never looked at it as something like, oh, let's make something really B movie and stupid. Like I've never really thought of it that way because of the way it's shot. It has a gorgeous look to it, and the acting is really strong from the two leads.
Oh
Right?
yeah,
There's nothing in the movie that where you're laughing. Like the effects are great, and I mean the end. It's a little bit shaky, maybe.
yeah.
I did read online that they were losing, like they were running out of money for like the last 20 minutes of the movie. I feel like you can see that a little bit, but otherwise.
Yeah, so I just remember, same thing with Darkness Falls, because Darkness Falls came out not too long after that, and I remember the reception that Darkness Falls got with it's really really bad, but then there's some argue though it's supposed to be campy, that's not supposed to be campy, and
Is that the one with Emma Caulfield from Buffy?
I'm not quite remember her name, but it's about the
Because
tooth fairy that
because there's
haunts.
one called Darkness Falls and there's one called Cherry Falls, and I get those confused.
Darkness
I think I've
Falls is
seen them.
Yeah, Darkness Falls is the one basically about the tooth fairy, and this woman
Oh,
was
okay.
wings, and she sort of prays, and then you find out that people feel sorry for her and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a weird sort of change in horror films. I remember the most disappointing horror film around that time was called Darkness, and it ended on a
Darkness.
cliffhanger. I remember everybody. It was the first movie I'd ever been in that people booed when it was over. I think it had it might have had Anna Paquin in it. I'm not quite sure, but it was terrible.
Okay. I don't. That one doesn't sound familiar. I don't think I've ever seen a movie in a theater where everyone booed at the end. I'm trying to think. I don't think that's happened. I've had people clap. Like I
Yeah.
remember when I saw Titanic with my mom opening weekend, and I mean, it was just a packed house, and everyone just erupted in applause at the end. I remember that, but booing, not so much.
I like Jeepers Creepers because I consider myself to be an aficionado of bad taste, but also aficionado of bad movies. I find worth in movies that most people scoff at,
Oh yeah.
and like Showgirls.
But so you consider Jeepers Creepers a bad film that you just enjoy on like a guilty pleasure
No,
level?
not necessarily, because I love horror, so I try to find merit in all horror films. And the thing I like about Jeepers Creepers is it's not just some crazy redneck guy in the South Florida killing
Yeah,
people, that it's
yeah, yeah,
something that you really still don't understand their backstory, what it
yeah.
exactly is. I think that's actually a clever choice, is that we really
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the thing is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always really liked this film ever since it came out. I remember I saw it opening night with some friends, and I found it really exciting and fun, and nothing for me in watching it again yesterday for the first time in a long time. I mean, I was like, did I must have seen it on video at some point, but I don't think I've seen this movie in 15 years. Like it'd been a while. All I could remember was like the opening stuff. And then
Yeah.
once he's pulling the tongue out of the decapitated head, I was like, oh, I forgot that part. Jesus Christ, this is too much. I don't want to know what that was like for 12-year-olds. You're like, okay, maybe this is one nobody in my life should let me watch.
Oh, I didn't get scared by stuff like that. I was so intrigued by it all.
Like
I
he
never got
goes to
scared.
town on the head, man. It's not like a quick little aside. It's like a minute of him just like going crazy on that head.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the opening 20-ish minutes are great. I love the opening. It's got that. I don't know if you've seen Duel by Steven Spielberg, that just like very simple idea of like two cars on a road kind of in the middle of nowhere, and the truck behind the car is, the
Yeah.
truck driver is going nuts, And it's like, what do we do? I mean, it's
Right.
2001, so they do bring the cell phone into it, and they're like, oh, no service. So we
Yeah.
do have that. But I love the photography there, and that truck is so intimidating, and like, oh my god, who is behind the wheel of this thing? And my
Right.
my favorite shot of the whole movie is when they're driving past him as he's dumping that body into the chute, and he turns and just looks at them and stares at them while the camera just keeps going down the road. Like, some of that early stuff is creepy. So I love that, like the opening. What do you think of the opening of this movie?
I like that as someone who has, gone from Georgia to Florida, and you have to pass all of those cornfields, and
Yeah.
there are some places in Florida, like, where they're going, where you could get lost, and something like that could be a possibility.
Mm.
I don't know, I look at everything, in a different manner, I guess, but, I think that I like how they have a mission to go back home to their
Hmm.
family, etcetera, and they never really make it, and the brother and sisters, there's a really, good relationship between them, and I like how, we're rooting for them and that we don't know what the thing is behind it, if it's something supernatural or if it's just a crazy person, some crazy redneck in North
Yeah.
Florida. And I like how that director choice where you don't really know what's chasing them or what's being
Hmm.
aggressive towards them. So I think that's really smart. But
Yeah.
like you said, we get to see what's chasing them pretty early on in the
Yeah.
movie, and you're like, okay, well, is this thing gonna get them?
Yeah. Yeah, I clocked it. It's like 44, 45 minutes in, and you're seeing the creeper in full, and you're like, okay. Like,
Yeah.
maybe could have held off on that a few more minutes. But as you say, one of the things that's really unique about this movie, amongst all the horror films coming out around this time, is that this is not a boyfriend and girlfriend, which we would
Right.
see in most stuff. This is a brother and sister. And I did read online that they were written that way in order to eliminate sexual tension and keep them focused on the creeper, right? And
Right.
not be like, oh, are they going to fall in love by the end of this? I mean, I guess the
Well, they
movie
are
could have worked with them as boyfriend or girlfriend, but I like the brother sister dynamic. I think that adds something to this movie.
no, I do too, because you don't have to worry about them, because a lot of horror films when there's boyfriends or girlfriends, they have to sneak in a sex scene, and I think with this one,
That would
it
have
being a
been
brother
that would have been way out of place in this movie.
right, a brother and sister that, um it adds something that there's a closeness and there's because usually sometimes in horror films, if a boyfriend or girlfriend are in trouble, they're pretty much over the death of their boyfriend or girlfriend once they get killed by this monster or slasher pretty quickly, and
Yeah.
it's basically save their own self. But with the whole brother and sister relationship, I think it's they have each other's backs and they're trying to protect one another. And so
Hmm.
you care for them a
Yeah.
bit more than it would be if it was a couple.
Yeah, you care for these two more than you do a lot of characters in other movies. I mean, another way that they could have done this would have been like maybe a group of 6 friends or something, like Texas Chainsaw, or like where it opens with a big group, like an ensemble of characters, and then we watch one by one get eliminated by the creeper throughout the 90 minutes, and then leaving maybe 2 of them at the end, and we see who might survive. I like that we're just focused on 2 characters, their brother and sister. We're with them pretty much the whole movie. So that's kind of cool.
Well, yeah, well, you get Jeepers Creepers too when it is a whole bunch of kids, but I don't.
That's right. I would have liked to have to looked at the sequel. I saw the sequel once in theaters when it came out. I've not seen
No,
it since. All I remember is a scene of a bunch of like shirtless men on a bus.
basically
That's all
football
I
players
remember
and cheerleaders and
about that movie. But yeah, I'll ask you about the sequels briefly at the end here. So let's see. So one thing that bugged me watching it, yes, I'm like, what? Like, why does he have to turn around and go investigate this? I mean, you don't have
human
a movie, but I'm like, I'm not quite buying that. Like, well, what if we just keep driving, and what if we find out later that we could have saved someone's life? It's
right.
like, really? You
The
just keep
search and
driving.
dragging bodies, yeah.
Let's go down the chute and see what it's like. Did we not see that scary giant creature man standing there? I mean, they're over there. I mean, they're over there for minutes on end. It's like, how do they know he's not going to come back? Like, is this
Right.
risk
It's
your life? Like, to do all this? Come on.
but that's a typical horror trope. That's in everything,
Yeah,
but it represents human nature. We always are curious about things we shouldn't be curious about,
that's true.
and I mean, we all make fun of it. Like, we all make fun of that horror trope of, oh my gosh, this house is haunted. How much is it? And then this
Yeah.
horror trope of seeing a person carry dead bodies, and you're like, let me go see what they're doing and follow them down to this abyss. I mean, that's one horror trope you can't, I guess, escape.
And she's, the sister Trish, played by Gina Phillips, who I just think is great in this movie. I'd love her in this.
Yeah.
She does try to stop him, and she has that cringeworthy line ripped out of the deleted scene from Scream, where she says, that part in scary movies when somebody does something really stupid and everybody hates them for it? This is it. It's so like, it does not belong in this movie. It's like, you're like, oh, right, this is 2001, so they have to add that line.
Or maybe that adds the campiness of it. So maybe it's being critical of horror films. So that line is sort of showcasing and highlighting the absurdity of some horror films. So maybe that's sort of breaking the fourth wall, possibly.
It breaks the fourth wall, but this is 5 years after Scream. It's kind of been done to death, and it's like, well...
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. I keep doing that. But I think that's the only line in the whole movie that references like, oh, they've seen or aware of other horror films. So in Scream, it's just constant. So it really becomes kind of a fun part of the story. But I mean, that's okay. She delivers it fine. It's good. And then he goes down there. There's that weird shot of him falling. It's like lasts for like 5 seconds. And he's like, ah. And then he hits the ground. It's so weird. I don't really know how they did that shot, but it's unusual.
And then he discovers some pretty screwed up things, which I think is really shocking, I guess, to an 11-year or 12-year-old seeing that. It's like, wow, this is pretty disturbing, but
no, it's a good thing. Like if in real life you come across a shoot like that, just don't go down there because that's what you'll find.
And I think one of the clever things about what he finds, it's not just one person. So we know that this thing is, out for a reason, to not just want one victim. It's not targeted. It wants multiple people.
Yeah.
It needs multiple things to feast on or to collect.
For 23 years, right?
Yeah.
It comes out. What is the rule? Is it introduced in the first one or the second one where it's every 23? It is in the first one. That's right, that lady. And
Giselle.
Giselle. And he comes out for 23 days every 23 years.
Or every 23 springs or something of that nature. 23 seasons.
No, because I read a piece on the sequel that the director was like, do I have to set this 23 years in the future because I've set up this rule? But they were like, no, we'll just have the sequel be set on the 23rd day. So the sequel, released 2 years later, is set just a few days after the events of the first movie.
So there is that whole aspect of it. Maybe something ancient in that it's something that's always done and will always do.
Yeah.
But we don't find out until the end, by the psychic. But I think she tries to warn them in the beginning, but they don't listen, of course.
They're not listening. So we get that reveal in, down the chute of all of those bodies. And then you recognize, okay, this is not just like a realistic slasher or something. This is going into that supernatural realm. So you're happy about that. When it goes supernatural outside of, being more realistic, you're on board. I had but the first I was like, oh, I have to go with this. Okay, this isn't something that could happen. This is like a supernatural story. Okay. I have to always kind of suspend my disbelief when that happens. But usually in a good way. I mean, as I said, my favorite horror film of the last 10 years is Hereditary, and that's a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of some really graphic, horrendous scenes and moments of really authentic grief that I love, by the end of that movie, we're not in the real world anymore. So you have to go with it sometimes. Yeah,
and then Hereditary, the supernatural aspect and the thing that's preying on them becomes secondary, and you figure out that their main villain is their own grief and their own unwillingness to accept, their hostility towards one another and their family falling apart.
Now, in Jeepers Creepers, are there any parts that make you jump? Like anything in that were like maybe on your first viewing, if you remember? Because watching it, and I jumped again, and I'm like, I think this part has made me jump every time I watch it. That part where she's on she's kind of waiting for him to come back, and you see that out of focus brown truck coming, and you're like, oh crap, here he comes. And I'm like, wait, I was trying to remember. I'm like, does he come back while he's still down there? And oh no, it's someone else.
Right.
But then it, like the camera goes back, and then there's Justin Long. There's what's his name? Derry. He like pounds on he like pounds his hands on the window, and it's like, well, oh my god, I always forget about that. That's a good scare. I like that one.
I wouldn't say there's a particular scene that scares me, but there's one that's pretty screwed up that I always really, really love, besides the ending, but we'll get to that later. It's when they go, the cat lady, they're like,
Oh,
hello. Yeah. And it's Eileen Brennan, who played
Eileen Brennan from Clue.
Yeah, Miss Peacock.
Like, how did she get involved in this movie? I was trying to find that out. She's in it so briefly. Like, did she need the money?
I don't think so. I think that's why it goes back to the campy aspect. I mean, she's a comedic actress.
Yeah.
And then, she's like basically moaning, and you figure out that he basically impelled her.
Yeah.
And he's using
her feet are like above the ground.
And he's just like discards her body, and then they freak out,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I that sort of adds to the campy nature. It is terrifying in certain aspects, but there's some choices that you said, like her acknowledgement of, oh my God, this only happens in scary movies. We're going to be victims of this again. Some very interesting choices in casting sort of adds to the whole that it's self-aware of how campy it's supposed to be. But maybe that's just my interpretation.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the casting here. We have Justin Long playing one of the two leads in Derry, and this was his first horror film. I believe his film debut was in Galaxy Quest from 1999, which is one of my favorites. Such a great movie. I think the director had seen him in that, and that's like he had him come in and read for this one. But he's had a long career. He's in a lot of comedies. I feel like he's more known today for comedies than he is for horror films. But people forget, like, he's the star of this one, and he does a great job. I love him in this movie. He's great.
Yeah, I mean, the first movie I saw him besides this was I'm trying to think of the movie he was in where they all faked acceptances to like a college.
Acceptance.
Yeah,
isn't that the title?
Yeah, I think it is.
With Blake Lively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a really funny movie. But yeah, he's comedic, and so it's really funny that he has a range that you really don't get to see that much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I meant to look up her filmography. I don't know what else I've seen Gina Phillips in, but I think she's great in this. Like, she's so gorgeous. She's got a great kind of natural charisma. Like, she's really good in this.
I don't know what show she's in. I don't think she's been in.
I believe she's in Jeepers Creepers 3.
That's a cameo or something.
I'm sure she had to have done more in between.
Probably.
But yeah, you say that campy aspect. The reason this film is not as scary as a lot of other horror films at the time, it's just there are moments that are just so over the top, campy, and ridiculous, like him holding up Eileen Brennan and him sucking out people. Yeah,
Miss Peacock.
Miss Peacock. She's also great. I need to see more of her work, but she's also great in Private Benjamin with Goldie Hawn.
Yes.
She got a Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination for that. She's like
She may have been in a TV show as well. There was a TV show adaptation that Goldie Hawn wasn't in, and I think Alison was in it as well. She was also in the really bad cult '80s musical Babes in Toyland with Drew Barrymore and Keanu Reeves.
Okay, you're blowing my mind right now. There is a Babes in Toyland with Drew Barrymore, Keanu Reeves, and Eileen Brennan.
And Richard Mulligan, who was in Empty Nest.
Okay.
Yes.
Did that go to theaters, or it was like a TV project?
In Germany, it did. But it was I'm a massive cult musical fan. I love really bad cult musicals. And it was a cult musical, and it was in the time of before Drew Barrymore got back into film, and she was probably still on substances. She was like 11 or 12.
Okay.
And Keanu Reeves had just finished Bill and Ted, and Eileen Brennan may have been on that show, the Private Benjamin show. And they're all together and they're singing, and obviously Keanu Reeves and Drew Barrymore are not singing, but it was super bad, but I love it because of how terrible it is. 1986.
What year was it?
1986.
1986. Okay. So yeah, so Drew Barrymore is still very young. I think she's
Before Poison Ivy. She was like 11 or 12.
yeah, Poison Ivy is 92, I think, and she was like 14 or 15 for that movie. So she's not quite to her bad girl days yet. But
No,
that's interesting. Is it bad in like an entertaining way? Like, is it fun? It's just really awful to watch. Like,
terrible. I love it because it's horrible. And I forgot. My mind's totally blown. And it has Mr. Miyagi.
Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid.
Yes, as a Santa figure. And and even though he's from California, he does his Mr. Miyagi voice in that film and sings in that Mr. Miyagi voice to almost where it's not, you're not able to understand what he's saying. It's you gotta watch it.
If I'm doing my podcast Film at 50 in the year 2036, we will definitely do an episode on Babes in Toyland.
Yeah.
I'll be like, many years ago, a guest introduced me to this. Yeah, that'll be fun. If it's like easy to watch, like I might put that on in a few days. But yeah, I wish Brennan was in this more in Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah, she's like this much.
She's so talented. And I'm just like, why is she in it so briefly? So before we get to her scene, the first big like action scene in the movie is when the creeper jumps up on the car, right, and attacks those two police officers. And that's a pretty good scene. I like the kind of the stylized action there, and when the car in front of them and the decapitated head just hits the windshield and they go, whoa.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that him sucking the tongue out of the head goes on too long.
Like, that's the gross out factor that it had. That was like,
that's where I check out a little. I'm like, okay, we can show this. Do we need to?
I think that proves the point that it tries to highlight that this thing is not human, and it really just basically doesn't have a vendetta against any particular person, that it just wants to feast, just is hungry, and it doesn't take favorites.
He's in it, and the creeper's in a good mood about it. He's whistling the song Jeepers Creepers, right?
Right.
As he strolls over to the decapitated head.
That was one of the things I remember after when that first came out when I was 12. And then I heard that song, in records, etc. And I got really freaked out.
Yeah.
Because then it equated, that song, that really like not even a bad song. I think it was a romantic song from the 30s or 40s to this creature who wants to eat you.
Old music often plays a role in horror films to a really good degree. Yeah. Like Insidious does that too, where it uses like old timey music, and it's scary because it's like unusual. It's not the kind of music we hear anymore. But I think that following Halloween, like I went trick-or-treating from probably the last time I was 16. But I remember thinking like, man, what if I heard someone whistling Jeepers Creepers behind me? That would freak me out for sure.
It's hilarious.
And yeah, the score is really good in the film. Like the cinematography, the editing, everything. I forgot to look up the budget, but I don't think it costs very much money.
10 million.
10 million, but it looks like it looks bigger. Like the framing of the movie and the color, and outside of a couple effects right at the end that look a little dated, for the most part the effects are pretty solid, and it does feel like a $30 million movie, and it probably costs more like 10, right?
Right.
So they did a good job there.
The South, I'm from the South, and I guess, horror films set in the South, I guess because it's so spacious, because you couldn't get away with doing this in New York City. Couldn't getting away with setting this film in Los Angeles because, it's not.
They could call for help.
Right. There's no place for this thing to hide.
Yeah.
And so if you place it in the Midwest, or if you place it in the South, especially Florida, because people think of Florida as being Miami, Tampa, Orlando, but the rest of Florida is basically like that. Yeah. And I think it was really brilliant choice to set it there, because a lot of people will have to go that route to go on vacation, and they might get a little bit freaked out when they have to take that route. They're like, maybe this thing really is, or something.
When they go on that road and then they turn on the radio and it's doing the Jeepers Creepers song.
I would turn back around.
You would turn around. We'll try again next year.
Yeah.
One thing I do love about this movie, even though I think we see him a bit too much in too much detail, I do like the look of the creeper, and it is an original horror movie villain by 2001. It's kind of hard to come up with anything that's kind of different than what we've seen before. I mean, all
Exactly.
the big horror movie villains have kind of come and gone. And it's like, well, what can we come up with in terms of like design and like the face and the hair and everything that can be kind of
Wings.
unique? And this is a unique look to this guy.
Yeah.
Jonathan Breck played the creeper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he played the creeper again after the first movie. I know he's the creeper and
Probably.
he's probably the creeper in the second one. The third one came out much later, so maybe that's someone else. I don't know. But he's, he does a good job with this role, and I love the makeup on the face and that weird like straw hair that sticks out the back. And
He kind of looks like a scarecrow bit.
yeah, it's a
A
bit of a
really warped,
scarecrow look.
demonic scarecrow.
Yeah. And like just everything about the wardrobe and the way he moves, that he's able to jump really high in the air, just adds a little bit of dimension to kind of a new creative horror movie villain we had not seen in
And there's a
2001 before.
scene where she sees his wing and she's like, "Oh, this
His
is not a
wings, he can
person."
fly. Yeah.
But then I think Trish sees like one of his wings or something, and she's like, there's a scene where like she discovers that it's not like a person, that it's like, I think it's when he's on the car and she sees like one of his wings, and she's like, oh, in her mind, she's like, this is something supernatural. This is not something that we're going to be able to, just call the police for them to get. This is something that's otherworldly, so to speak.
Now, did you know in the Eileen Brennan scene when she's dead and he's like hoisting up her body, and you see it in the movie, originally the creeper had one line of dialogue. Did you know that?
I did not. What was that line?
On the set, he says, "She don't smell too good, Darius." And you watch the shot, like when he drops her body, nothing's coming out. You just hear like a little bit of the wind, but his mouth is like this, like like it's moving. And so they took it out later because they thought, well, that might ruin the spell a little bit. Let's make him not say anything. And I think that was the right call.
Yeah, that would have ruined it.
I mean, sometimes like if it was at the very end of the movie and it was like a really killer line, no pun intended, again, I keep going in that direction, maybe it could have worked. But like halfway through the movie or an hour in or whatever that scene is, it would have been out of place. I'm like, oh, we can talk. And then we never hear him again. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
It would have been too much. Yeah. So kind of getting towards the end, like the last half hour of the movie, I kind of check out a little bit. It's like a lot of like the cops showing up on the scene and guns. And it's like, okay.
In jail.
The last half hour, in the jail, it's okay. But the last 5-6 minutes is pretty great. I love when Derry is captured and the sister screams at him, "Take me, I'm stronger." Like, take the girl, I'm stronger than he is. I really like that scene.
I like that because, I mean, you could try to find, I don't know, I try to find feminist merits and everything, but think about, the creeper not taking the psychic nor taking Trish, because it lives off your fear. And so it proves that the female characters are more brave than the male characters in there, because he sniffs Trish and he doesn't take her. He takes Barry, and he doesn't take the psychic either.
And he licks her cheek just to be sure, right?
Right, and she's praying, etc. And so maybe this shows that females are more powerful and braver than men, because she even says like, "I'm more stronger, I'm braver, and he's not as strong," etc. I don't know. I thought that kind of empowering.
Aren't women always stronger than men in horror films? 99% of the time.
Final girls. Yeah, there's a whole trope.
You don't see a lot of final guys, right? In a good horror film, you don't really see that much.
Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Well, that movie wasn't very successful.
No. So so she I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting how not only does he let the psychic live and Trish live, but possibly because they're not as scared of him as male characters are.
Yeah.
Because the male characters get killed because of their fear, and also because they're easily accessible meat. But going back, getting to the end, I think the best shot in the film is when you in the film and you see he's whistling, Jeepers Creepers, etc., and you see Derry's torso and body hanging up. That I remember
That is
that
just a startling shot. I mean, it's something. I think the reason this movie has had staying power for 20 years is the final scene. I think without that last scene, the movie would have been pretty easily forgotten after a couple years. But that last scene really makes it a standout in the genre.
That got me. I remember when I was a kid, I saw that. That got me. And
yeah, because you are not when you are not trained to go into a horror film thinking that the hero of the movie will be dead at the end, and in a really gruesome, uneasy manner, the way he is disposed of. Before we see his dead body, you hear him screaming in the background, and that's always really unsettling. And then to see like what he did to the body, it's like, oh my god, we've spent the whole movie with this guy, and he's a good guy. He didn't deserve that, and it's just like, oh, okay. It's the kind of ending you don't see. The creeper takes sides, yeah.
No, he takes his eyes.
Oh, yeah. He takes his eyes, and that beautiful final part of the shot where we see the eye. Now, do you know who plays the creeper in the last scene?
I do not.
Justin Long.
Really?
Justin Long is now like we see him from the back, and then we get like a close up on the eye. Was Justin Long playing the creeper? Like for the first part of that shot too, like where it's like you see the full body, or is it just the part where we see the eye? Because it took the eye of Derry, so it would make sense that the director would use the same actor for that close-up. I don't know if it's Justin Long in the costume before that, but that's what I read online in two different places. So that's kind of interesting. So Jonathan Breck had the day off. We don't need you today.
But I do think like it, because that corpse, it's not even corpse, it's just skin. But you see the hair, it looks very lifelike. So I remember that was when I was 12.
That's a great effect. I don't even know how they accomplished that, because it does look real. You're like, okay. And with the music going, and as I say, we're expecting the hero of the movie to live, and to see that happen, and that's the cut to black and roll credits. It's like, oh my god. I remember seeing it opening night with friends, and we were like, "Oh my god, did that just happen?" Like, so but it's done in a way where you're not walking out depressed. You're not like, "Oh gosh," because there are a few, as much as I love The Mist from 2007, the end scene of that movie. I don't know if you've seen The Mist. That is the most depressing final scene of a horror film maybe ever, and you walk out just kind of hanging your head. But Jeepers Creepers, even though it ends on a downer note, for some reason, it doesn't make you feel depressed at the end. Or maybe that's just me. I don't
know. Well, because some people do live.
Because she lived, so it's okay.
And so does the psychic.
And the psychic.
And
it's not just a bloodbath. It's not. There was it Texas Chainsaw: The Beginning? I want to say it was a prequel from like 2008 or somewhere around there, where everybody died, and like the final girl dies in the last scene, and Leatherface walks off into the night, and you're like, and that's it? Okay, great. Thank you for the last 90 minutes.
That's why Nightmare on Elm Street is my favorite horror film series. But once Nancy dies, and it's just like, what's the point?
Okay, so when the original final girl dies in the first movie, or in parts 2 or 3 or whatever, and they make more sequels about other people, like you kind of check out, you don't really care.
Well, because it's like the whole point of it was like yes, you knew that Freddy Krueger was something real, but the whole point of that series was her fighting him and him never being able to really get her, whether it's him leaving her alone for a particular reason. But when they finally made the stylistic choice to kill her off, and one of those, I forgot, it's either the Dream Trout or the Dream, with the Dawkins soundtrack.
The fourth one is the Dream Master.
The Dream Master.
Fifth one's the Dream Child.
Yeah, it is. When they finally killed Nancy off, you're like, what was the point of that? Like, the whole point of that was her experience with Freddy Krueger, I think.
Yeah, it always does bug me when you have a really strong, great character in the first movie, and they bring that actor back for a later sequel, and then they kill them. It's like, really? That's why the Scream series is so unique, in that we've had the same 3 leads in all 4 movies, and they never died. That was kind of cool. Like, I remember going to see Scream 4, and I'm like, one of them's gonna die. I just knew it in my bones. One of them is gonna die. And like, there's that scene where Gail Weathers like gets a knife to the chest, and I'm like, oh, here we go. Oh no, okay, she's okay. And then you think Sydney's dead at the end. Oh nope. And that was the stressful movie to watch as a giant Scream fan. And we have Scream 5 coming in January.
Right.
All 3 of the leads are back again, so we'll see what happens. I'm
crossing
my fingers, like, don't kill Sydney. Like, I will not be happy. But yeah, I mean, any other thoughts on Jeepers Creepers? Would this movie had been better if Dolly Parton had been in it?
I knew you were going to bring up Dolly Parton because I'm obsessed with her. No.
Should Dolly Parton have played the Eileen Brennan role?
No, she would have never done that. That would have been traumatizing for people to see.
Has she been in a horror film before? I don't think she has.
No, she has not. She's been in the best little horror house in Texas.
Did she ever do a genre film of any kind? Suspense, action? Did she only do comedy, drama?
Yes.
She's so great in Steel Magnolias and 9 to 5, which is a great movie.
And she did Straight Talk, and she did Rhinestone, which is that musical with Sylvester Stallone.
Oh, right. Okay.
He sings.
Has she been in a film in like the last 20 years? Like, I feel like I haven't seen her in a movie in a while.
She's been producing some movies.
Producing films.
Yeah. She and been involved. She did a Christmas movie on Netflix.
Oh, there was a Netflix movie she was in recently.
And then a Netflix TV series that she's done.
Okay.
She's having a renaissance in her career right now. And actually, I'm got accepted into a PhD program to study the lyrics of Dolly Parton. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
You've been accepted into a PhD program where you study the lyrics of Dolly Parton? That's your focus?
Yes. So looking at her songs through different lenses because
okay.
Right, because people do that with poets. Why not do it with songwriters?
Yeah, that's a good
songwriters
point.
in essence are poets because those lyrics rhyme, they have a particular meaning, they're inspired by older poetry. Dolly Parton is really inspired by those folk ballads that came over from Ireland and Scotland and the UK that came to the South, those really depressing songs. And so, just sort of tying those to their roots, so to speak, and what she was actually trying to say in those lyrics.
I should clarify, our listeners might be extremely confused right now why I brought her up. If you go to James' Instagram, which he will plug at the end of this episode, he posts a lot of pictures of Dolly Parton. The last few days, every time I pull up Instagram, there's a new one. So I said, interesting. A horror. No, I love Dolly Parton. I love seeing her on there. It's fun. But I'm like, okay, a horror movie fan who loves Dolly Parton. That's probably a small group.
Well, I'm interested in lots of things, and I don't want to be just a horror fan or just a Dolly Parton fan or just a Saved by the Bell fan. I like a lot of things, and if people can dig, they can dig.
Absolutely. Did you ever meet Dolly Parton?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so that's on the bucket list. You gotta get that done.
Oh yeah. Next time she tours,
maybe she'll tour soon. Like once that people are starting to come back. Yeah.
In celebration of her 75th birthday, she wants to go on a big stadium.
So make that happen. So anything else we want to say about Jeepers Creepers before we wrap up our conversation? Like, any influence you think the film had on the horror genre of the last 20 years? Or was this just kind of like
I'm doing research on 2001. 2001 was a really weird year for horror films. You had The Others, which was really good. I remember when I saw The Others, and that spooked me out. Yeah. You had Ghost of Mars. You have 13 Ghost. You had
a lot of ghost movies.
You had Elvira's Haunted Hills, which is a sequel to Elvira Mistress of the Dark, or prequel, depending on how you look at it. And so the early 2000s, many may not agree with me, there was some really bad horror films that flopped tremendously in the early 2000s because they were trying to figure out what couldn't have been done, what hadn't been done before. And it came out, I think Jeepers Creepers was successful in that it was original.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that it took an original idea and did it successfully versus, Darkness Falls versus Darkness, versus just other horror films that came out around that time.
Yeah, I think it is an original, especially of that time when, as you say, in 2001, filmmakers were trying to figure out kind of what to do next with the genre because horror films were kind of dead for a while from like
Yeah,
91 to 96. Scream comes out, it's a huge hit, revolutionizes the genre. And then from 97 to 2000, we get a lot of those kind of meta slasher movies. But that was killed by Scary Movie, which came out in the summer of 2000, the spoof. And so that kind of ended those movies. And so by '01, it's like, okay, so what kind of movies are we looking to do now? When you look at the list of the horror films from '01, it's kind of like a mix of like kind of old-fashioned horror films like The Others, which is probably might be the best horror film of 2001. The Others.
I agree.
It's really that's a really strong movie and with just a tremendous twist ending. Like that's a great twist at the end.
Yeah, it's great. And then, yeah, if you
but then a lot of these other ones are not great. That's like you just said, Ghosts of Mars, 13 Ghosts, Scary Movie 2 came out in the summer of '01. And speaking of The Exorcist, have you seen Scary Movie 2?
Yes, unfortunately.
You don't like okay, that movie is not great. I did like the opening spoof of The Exorcist, was kind of fun.
And I'm not quite sure which Scary Movie Tim Curry was in.
Tim Curry? Was it the second one?
Might have been.
I don't think he's in 3 and 4, so it must be, it's the haunted house, so it must be 2.
So, and it was really weird because I remember being 11 and 12 and horror started died in a really weird period where like there weren't a lot of horror films that came out. If they did come out, they weren't very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Jeepers Creepers may not have been successful, quote unquote, critically, but it was successful financially.
Mm-hmm. Well, it came out on a good weekend. It came out Labor Day weekend. That's the time, especially 20 years ago, where movies didn't really come out that weekend because people are off on vacation and stuff. Right. And so it's always a really quiet weekend. It's usually a good one for horror films. And I in my research, I read that at the time in 2001, Jeepers Creepers was the highest grossing film ever over Labor Day weekend. Like it had the biggest opening weekend of any movie ever on Labor Day weekend. And then
it made like $59 million. And back in 2001, $59 million was a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. For a horror film like this?
Billion.
You know? Yeah. If your movie today is not going to make at least 300 million, it's like goes direct to Netflix.
Exactly. And even Netflix has some really good horror films.
Oh, yeah. But that record for the Labor Day weekend for Jeepers Creepers, it was bested 2 years later by Jeepers Creepers 2.
Well, there you go.
And then I think that was bested in '07 with the horrible Rob Zombie Halloween remake that I hate. That movie opened with something crazy like 32 million, something like that. I think that has been bested. It had to. I mean, in the last 14 years, I'm sure there's been a Labor Day weekend movie that's done better, but it's typically not a weekend that a lot of movies open.
So, I mean, there's been a renaissance of horror. Mm-hmm. Since the early 2000s. I mean, starting, in the last few years, there's been a renaissance. But then, I don't know. I try to search out that horror film that I consider, man, this is really original. Sometimes I'm like, this is really bad. It just relies on cheap jump scares, or just relies on based on a true story, just in order to try to lure you in. And only
they got to get you in somehow.
Right. And then I did that. I had this sort of experiment with myself a few weeks ago. I'm like, let me try to find a horror film that's new that I'm actually feel like that's original and great. And it follows is really critically acclaimed, but it was a bit woke. And I don't need a message when I'm trying to get scared. I mean,
right. There is that. I do love that film, but it is a little bit of a message horror film.
But The Ritual was really original.
Oh, I haven't seen that. What's that about? It's on Netflix?
I'm not going to give it away. Yes, it's British. It's about these group of British friends that go camping after something really traumatic happens after a robbery in I guess you could say a convenience store. And for them to get away from that, they go camping in like Sweden, and then they start getting targeted by something. And this something is not a person. This something is something that is ancient and primal, that is worshipped, and it's really screwed up. It's really good.
My favorite film of 2020 was The Invisible Man. Did you see that?
The remake of The Invisible Man?
Yeah, with Elizabeth Moss.
I heard it was really, really good. I haven't had an
It's
opportunity to see
very
it.
good. Like I didn't know what I was like. Oh, they're like doing a cool like modern remake of The Invisible Man. This will be fine. But her performance is outstanding, and the director Lee Winnell, who worked on the Saw movies and done a lot in the horror genre, I thought he just did a really stellar job with that. So I would check that out too. Don't be
Hollow
turned
Man.
off by the title because it's like, oh, we've heard that before, but it is really good.
And Hollow Man.
Hollow Man, yes, The Invisible Man is better than Hollow Man.
Don't quote me, but I think Hollow Man was from the director of Showgirls, or at least a
Paul
writer.
Verhoeven, I believe his
Yes.
final big American movie was Hollow Man. He did
Yes.
Showgirls, and then he did Starship Troopers,
Yes.
and then
Had Basic
he did
Instinct.
Hollow Man, and then he disappeared after Hollow Man.
Basic Instinct.
Basic Instinct. He did. Verhoeven did a really good film. With, I think it was called Elle.
I know what you're talking
The
about. Gotcha.
actress was nominated for. I think she won the Golden Globe, and then she was nominated for the Oscar. Isabelle Huppert, and that
Yes.
was Verhoeven, and that was a really good kind of revenge movie. But yeah, like some directors, they have a couple flops, especially like those directors making big movies, like Jan de Bont, who made Speed and Twister, and then he just disappeared
Right.
after like 2003. So like sometimes they have a couple flops in there, and then their career's done. I don't know what happens there. They just don't want to make
One
a smaller
place
film.
One place I think that horror films have remained great and will always remain great is Japan. And usually when
Yeah.
they get remade in American films, they lose that sort of because we don't have a really understanding of their idea of ghost and their idea of spirits and their idea of the supernatural. And Japanese horror films still are really really original, really disturbing, and
Mm-hmm.
really amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I love those movies too. And there's so many I still need to get to. But that's Shudder, which I subscribe to. I love Shudder. It has so many cool horror films I've never heard of. I try once, if not every week, once every 2 weeks to like find 90 minutes and give a horror film I've never heard of a shot. Sometimes I'm like half an hour in and I'm like, nope. But sometimes here and there, there's a really, really great discovery. That's always fun too.
The Ritual.
The Ritual. I will check out The Ritual. So yeah, 2001, not a great time for horror movies. I mean, I think the two to see that year would be The Others and Jeepers Creepers. And then two of my 10 favorite films of that year are kind of like in the realm of horror films. Mulholland Drive and Donnie Darko are both from
Yeah.
'01. They're not really horror films. I wouldn't classify them as that, but they do have moments of terror in them and kind of like a supernatural aspect. And I mean, Mulholland Drive. I don't know if you've seen that film, but it is something else, man. I love that movie.
I just recently
David Lynch is an acquired taste. I've talked to guests on this podcast. I think one said that's like his least favorite director. So there are people who just don't go for his stuff. I've always loved his stuff, and my favorite of his work is Mulholland Drive from 2001.
I recently revisited Donnie Darko not too long ago.
Okay, I haven't seen that in a long time. I kind of want to watch it again this fall for its 20th anniversary. It's been a while.
My favorite scene is that really weird scene that has Tears for Fears head over heels.
Oh
Which
yeah,
is one of
that
my
long shot
songs.
down the
I
hallway, the
love
slow
it. I think
motion.
it's really interesting.
It doesn't introduce you to like every main character in the movie, like almost everybody, and it's like one take
Their
just down the.
emotions.
Yeah, and they're like, and the little girls are
control.
dancing, and
Yeah, I love that scene.
it's one of those shots where you're like, man, I bet that took a while to choreograph, like because it's all one take. So that's coming up. I believe that came out in October of '01, and then one other film from '01 that I kind of liked at the time. I've never seen it again since. Did you see Valentine? That was also an '01 horror film. Yeah.
It's not.
It's like more of a slasher movie, kind of like, in the Scream vein. I don't think it was very meta, but that came out earlier in '01. That's a slasher horror film I remember seeing in a theater. And then pretty much everything else that I found online were like direct-to-video sequels, like Children of the Corn, Revelation, Tremors 3, Back to Perfection, and Wishmaster 3, Beyond Gates of Hell.
Crazy.
How many Children of the Corns were there? Like 8?
Like they're still making them.
I mean, but apparently Puppet Master has 16.
But Puppet Master has a lot. And I get it, but like, because they're tied to the Nazis, because it was like witchcraft that happened during the Nazi periods, and now the Nazis, you find out the Nazis have something to do with the puppets. But I mean, we'd be 11 years old. 2001 was a big film, big year because you had Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or excuse me, it's called Sorcerer's Stone in America.
Yep.
You had Legally Blonde. It was a big year for movies. You
Yeah,
had
no, the
Princess Di.
first Lord of the Rings film was
Yeah.
'01. Yeah, no,
So
2001 overall, I think, is a really great year for movies. I mean, I like to look back at films 20 years on, and there's some really good titles for 2021, looking back at 2001, but not a great year for horror films, unfortunately.
no,
Yeah.
no, they're going to become really commercialized.
It's in that middle ground. We're 2 years away from, the onslaught of remakes, starting with Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Jessica Biel and Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
And we're 3 years away from Saw and that whole like push to the torture porn horror genre. So 0102, I mean, '02 we get The Ring with Naomi Watts. That was a
Yeah.
really big popular film, a remake of
Not as good as the Japanese version.
a Japanese film.
Not
But
really
yeah,
as big.
01, '02, we don't really know where the genre is going right now. So you get these kind of one-offs, cool creature feature in Jeepers Creepers, which was a lot of fun to talk to you about today. This was a lot of fun. I can't believe it's been 20 years since this movie came out. I still remember seeing it.
Oh, so old.
All right. Well, that takes us to the end here, James. Would you like to promote anything or tell our listeners where they can find you online? Now would be the time.
My Instagram is Mighty Morphin Vegan Ranger.
Mighty Morphin Vegan Ranger.
I love Power Rangers, Saved by the Bell, horror, Dolly Parton, 80s, 90s. And the good thing about social media is that you can find other weirdos that not only love, but know the obscure stuff that you like. And there's a big renaissance for people liking retro stuff. And they're like, do you remember that really, really bad movie? And I'm like, yeah, I love that movie. And it builds a community.
It totally does. I mean, I've been on Facebook and Twitter for many, many years. I feel like now Instagram is the most fun I have with social media. And when I started my social media for my podcast, Film at 50, it was July 1st, 2020, I'm like, man, if I can get 200-300 people to follow me, I'll consider that a win. And there's just been this explosion of just interest in film history, and so many people on there who love to talk about movies and share their passion for it. And doesn't matter what kind of genre you're into, or if you're looking at older movies, like, people are into this stuff. So it's a great community on Instagram. So it's a lot of fun. And that's how we found each other. So there you go.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, James, for being on this episode about Jeepers Creepers, celebrating its 20th anniversary at the end of August. And thanks to all of you for listening. As always, we will catch you next time on Film at 50.
Bye.